Hey everyone, welcome to Animated Icons for Android. Now this ended up being a pretty large project, so I'm breaking it out into a series of videos just to make it a little bit more digestible. This is part one, so hope you enjoy. When I think about apps that I've truly enjoyed using, a few characteristics come to mind. They feel very fluid and fun to use, and they also feel like they just go the extra mile. They care about all those little details that make an app truly beautiful. And one of those little details is animated icons. They're simple, but to me, they're the marker of a high quality app. It shows that the developers care about all those little things, those little micro interactions. And that level of craftsmanship is usually seen throughout the rest of their application. Android apps these days don't really utilize animated icons. Maybe it's because they feel difficult to implement and they don't really feel worth the effort for most developers. I think that's a shame, and I really want to add them to my arsenal of tools as an app developer so I can build that level of quality that I see in other apps. So that's what I'm going to do today. Now I want to cover this topic end to end. So we'll be looking at everything from how I am getting or building my assets to how we implement them in the application. Speaking of assets, we're mostly going to be focusing on vectors, so SVGs and vector drawables or vector painters in Android, as those are the typical formats used for iconography. You won't need any experience with design tools, but I will be dipping my toes a little bit here and there, as I feel like a little goes a long way. I'll also be building for Compose UI apps. However, the solutions that I'll be going over will also be applicable to apps that use the Android view system. But you should really be using Compose UI at this point. And with that, let's go. Let's take a look at two Android apps that make really good use of animated icons. So the first one is an app called Buzzkill by Sam Rustin. This is a beautifully designed notification automation utility, and if I click around on the main bottom nav, you can see that the icons at the bottom play a really satisfying animation as I click through them. So it just adds a nice little flair, a nice little fun aspect to the app. The next app we're going to look at is this app called Tack, which is a metronome app by Patrick Zedler. Now, Patrick uses animated icons in both a creative and functional way. So if we take a look at some of the icons down here at the bottom, you can see he has one for emphasis, and it plays a nice little animation and also shows which beat the emphasis is going to be on. We have this bookmark icon right here, which will bookmark the current BPM. We have the play button here, which will animate from play and pause. And then we have this sound icon here, which will animate and change it from sound to vibration, which is pretty awesome. And then we even have this one right here, which will animate, and it'll essentially update the BPM depending on the rate that you're tapping it, which is super cool. And if I play it, there's one other thing I want to point out, which is this little animated metronome icon at the top left that is animating to the BPM. So as I slow it down, it should also slow down. So very, very awesome use of animated icons. The first solution I want to talk about is a solution that will work well if you already have your animated icon assets ready to go, and that is Lottie. Now, if you haven't heard about Lottie, let me just read the docs to kind of tell you what it is. So Lottie is a library for Android, iOS, web, and Windows that parses Adobe After Effects animations exported as JSON with body movin and renders them natively on mobile and on the web. So essentially, you have your After Effects animations, you export them as JSON, and then in your Android application, you can use the Lottie Android library to parse that JSON and render that animation as a vector natively on the Android platform. So that's great, but I don't have After Effects animations ready to go because I don't know how to use After Effects. So what are my options there? Well, the first place you might look is Lottie Files. Lottie Files is a big repository of a bunch of Lottie animations. So you might be able to find something that you can utilize, but since I was specifically looking for animated icons, I was able to find something called Lordicon. Now, Lordicon specifically creates animated icons that are compatible with Lottie. And so what we're going to do is we're going to download an icon from Lordicon, import it into our Android app, and then use the Lottie Android library to help us render it as an animated icon. So let's take this trash icon that I found on Lordicon and download it as a JSON file that's compatible with Lottie and bring it into our Android application. So the first step is to download it. So if you look here, you have this JSON Lottie download button, but I actually want to go into this more section and download this Lottie JSON rough source file. This is because this is what they recommend if you're going to use it on an Android or iOS application. So if I just click download, you can see I have this JSON file ready to go. So let me just pull that into my Android app. So I've gone ahead and pulled that JSON file that I downloaded from Lordicon and dragged it into the res/raw directory in my Android application. Now, if you don't have that directory, what you can do is you can just go into your res folder and create a new Android resource directory and then just set the resource type to raw. So with that in place, now all I need to do is set up the Lottie Android library so that I can use that to help render this animation. So in order to parse that Lottie JSON file, I need to bring in that Lottie dependency into my application. And because I'm using a Jetpack Compose app, I'm going to bring in the Compose specific dependency. So here I'm on the Lottie docs and I'm just in the Android Jetpack Compose section. And so it shows you what dependency I need to pull in and what the latest version is. So I went ahead and did that. I brought it in and I synced it and I should be ready to go. So I made this button here and I want to render that Lottie animation as the icon for this button. So let's see how we can do that. According to the documentation, there are two things I need. I need the composition, which is the representation of that animation. And it's also going to be how we parse that JSON file that we added to the app. And I need something to drive the progress. So let's get the composition first. In order to do that, I'm going to call remember Lottie composition. It requires a Lottie composition spec. So I'm just going to call Lottie composition spec.raw res, and I'm going to reference that JSON file. So this will parse the JSON file and give us that Lottie composition that we need. And the second thing I need is something to drive the progress of the animation. The easiest way to do that is actually just to call animate Lottie composition as state. This takes in that composition and it will just interpolate through that animation for you. And so the last thing that we need to do is just render that Lottie animation. So I'm going to call Lottie animation, which is the composable function that'll help render it for us. I'm going to pass it the composition that it needs, and I'm also going to pass in that progress. And with all of that in place, we have the animation playing. It's a little bit big, so let me just quickly fix that. And now we have a properly sized animated icon playing for this button. There's still a couple problems here. One is that the animation is just playing automatically. I can show you that by just stopping and starting interactive mode again. And what I really want is for the animation to play when I click the button. And the other problem is that it's playing through the entire sequence of animations, and I only care about a specific portion, like a specific animation, which was that hover state that we saw in Lordicon. So let's fix those two issues. So in order to set up the animation so that is triggered by clicking the button, we need to change how we progress through the animation. So I'm going to change this into remember Lottie animatable, and this will give us more control over how we start the animation. It's also very similar to the animatable APIs provided by Compose. So on top of this, we'll also need a coroutine scope. So I'm just going to create a scope equals remember coroutine scope. I'm also just going to move these things up here just to clean things up a little bit. And now what I need to do is in the clickable modifier, I can actually set it up so that the scope launches a coroutine, and within this I can call progress.animate, and I can pass in the composition. Last thing I need to do is change this from progress to progress.value, and in the interactive mode you can see that now the animation isn't playing automatically. However, once I click the button, the animation is playing. Now, in order to isolate the portion of the animation that we care about, I'm going to use something called Lottie clip spec. If we take a look at the animate function, we can pass this Lottie clip spec as an optional parameter. So let's do that. Oops. I'm going to add a clip spec equals Lottie clip spec, and we're going to use the class called progress. Now, what progress allows us to do is it allows us to specify a range of the animation that we want to play. And this will be helpful because we can actually figure out at what portion does the animation that we care about start and what portion does it stop. There's a lot of ways that we can find that range, but the way that worked well for me is to actually use the Lottie Files app. So the Lottie Files app allows you to upload any Lottie animation. So what I did was I uploaded that Lordicon trash animation to the Lottie Files app. And if I look into it, it gives you this nice little inspector. And the way that I was using it is, so it's playing the animation. And I just want to figure out at what frames does the animation I care about start. So I want to play like this animation right here. And if we look at it, the animation starts at about frame 91, and it ends at about frame 150, 149, 150. So I can take those values. Let's go back. It was 90. What was that? 91, right? And I'll do like 91 divided by the total number of frames, 421, and that's about 0.22. So go over to Android Studio. I'm just going to set up some variables. Start equals 0.22f. And then the last frame was, I believe, 150. What was it? 150 divided by 421 is about 0.36. Val end equals 0.36f. And so then what I can do is pass in start and end. And then if we play this animation, should now only play the proportion that we care about. There's still one small problem, and that's when we actually first render the button. If you notice here, there's nothing showing, like the icon's not showing at all, and it'll only show up after I click it. And when I click it, the animation will play, and then it'll be there. So we need a way to sort of initialize it so that it starts off on that start frame. So in order to do that, I'm going to open up a launched effect. I'm going to pass in unit, and I'm going to make this a trailing lambda block. And so I'm opening up a launch effect because I need to be within a coroutine scope. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call progress.snap2. I'm going to pass it the composition, and I'm going to say the progress is going to be start. So this will basically initialize that Lottie animation to start at that start frame, and then it'll animate only when I click it, right? So now it's starting at that start frame, and the animation still plays. There's one last thing I want to do, which is I want to update the color of the icon. Now, in order to do that, we have to use something called Lottie dynamic properties. Let's go ahead and set that up. I'm going to set up properties equals remember Lottie dynamic properties. This allows us to specify which properties we want to update. So I'm going to pass in a specific property. It's a little bit awkward the way we have to set this up, but bear with me here. So the property we want is, we're going to want Lottie property dot color. The value that we want is color.white, and we're going to want the integer representation of that. And the key path is actually the way that we reference the specific path, the specific portion that we want to update. In this case, I want to update the entire icon, so I can just pass it in this wildcard. With that in place, then what I can do is within the Lottie animation, I can actually pass in dynamic properties. Dynamic properties equals properties. And if it updates, hopefully, yep, the icon turned white. Perfect. With that, we're in a pretty good spot. We have the icon that we want, and it's animating the way we want to. So let me just show you some examples of, I was playing around with different icons from the Lord icon set. And so I'm gonna play this in interactive mode. Let's increase this a little bit. And let's also scoot this over. So these are some icons that I was playing around with. You can see I set it up in the same way, and they work really, really well. I think these look great. I highly recommend you play around with Lord icon and Lottie. I think it is a great way to get started with animated icons. Thanks so much for watching part 1 of this series. Stay tuned for parts 2 and 3 coming out in the next couple of weeks. If you liked the video, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye.